Hey everybody, welcome back to Euzoia, the weekly podcast where we try to figure out how to live a better life, one little topic at a time. And we are now in August, and in August we're covering all things career and work. And I'm super excited to be here with Sofia. She is probably one of the best people I know when it comes to the topic of agency and how to kind of use agency to shape your career, to make decisions, but then also to lead teams, to cultivate that in others. Before we just started, she told me she's read 2 books on agency just in the last 2 or 3 weeks. So I think we'll have enough to talk about. And yeah, let's maybe just dive right in. For agency, it's this thing that like kind of flows around, and like actually I've never heard of it before I joined this startup incubator 2 years ago, and then like everybody always has been talking about this afterwards. So yeah, it might be a bit related to like founding entrepreneurship. But yeah, one thing I've always been thinking about is like, is it actually something you bring or something you can cultivate or develop, right? Like, is it like nature versus nurture? How do you think about that? Did you learn that skill or yeah?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking, Christoph, and also thanks for having me on the podcast. So I think in answer to your question is both. I do think that you can inherit agency and your environment can cultivate agency, but you can also learn agency. So, for example, for me, I was born and raised in Belarus, which is probably the least likely place to cultivate agency because it's a really conservative society. And I was told often that I stick out. And that was like a bad thing because I asked too many questions or raised my hand too often. But I think as a teenager, I don't think I've ever been that agentic. Like my mom picked my university for me and like all I had to do was just like study super hard. But I think because in Belarus there aren't that many opportunities, I always knew that I had to work extra hard to potentially get out or get like a really good job. And that's when I realized that just studying hard isn't enough and you have to be more proactive and more agentic. So I think that that kind of skill I definitely cultivated throughout my 20s. So I think that my mom is perhaps more agentic and she like gave me some of these lessons. But I also don't necessarily think that I was born with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess it's always a combination of both things. I noticed that I actually completely skipped over your CV, so let me plug that right in here. I think we know each other from you work at Hive. The last 4 years, you've been the founder of Hive, which is a community for people who care about animal welfare. And I noticed that basically your career, well, from looking at LinkedIn, so I'm curious about your interpretation of this, but there's like phases of like trying a lot of things and doing a lot of things and then like doing something really well for a long time, right? So I think you did like a bit of English teaching, a bit of project management, a bit of this and this. And then you worked for Veganuary for 3 years. And then it's like, well, let me explore again, like do a bit here, a bit there, a bit there. And then like really double down on Hive. I'm curious like how you think about this like explore versus exploit, right? Like when do you go into these phases of like just looking at different things and then when do you kind of double down as like this is it now? It's like I'm just gonna like do everything I can in this space.
Yeah, you're very observant. Your analysis of my career so far is spot on. I do very much agree that especially early in your career, you should explore because you don't yet know what you're good at. So I think changing jobs once a year or maybe even try things for half a year and see how it pans out is great. I remember being criticized when I was in my 20s that I had a jumpy CV. Some recruiters were like, oh, it would be so hard for me to get a job. And I was like, but am I supposed to? Aren't I supposed to have a jumpy CV? And I think that it definitely works out this way because this way you can learn which jobs you prefer and what is actually your ideal job. And I think all these different things that I've tried before Veganuary, I think helped me to get the Veganuary job, but also helped me understand that the kind of job like being a project manager, internationalization at Veganuary would be perfect for me because it ticks so many boxes. But then after Veganuary, I did spend like 3.5 years there. I think for me, it's starting to be like maybe the longest I can maybe spend anywhere unless there is like a particular huge pivot in an organization that could like change things a lot. And I definitely try to explore more. And obviously now I'm exploring again after being a Hive for after doing Hive for like 4 years now.
Well, you said 3 is the max. You did it for 4, so that's there must have been changes within Hive then, I guess. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, I can definitely resonate with this. I think in my CV, it was not spotty enough for like way too long. I did my studies, then I did my PhD, and it's like that alone took like, I don't know, like 8 years already. And it's like I did like 0 internships in that time, and it's like looking back at that time now, it's like, what was I thinking? It's like even assuming academia would be something for me, that then during the PhD, I was like, actually, I think it's the furthest away from anything I like have good personal fit with. So yeah, like well done on exploring so often. So
Thank you.
yeah, like in your explorations, like do you try to optimize for learning, or do you have an idea already of what makes a good job, and you're kind of trying to see if that job fits that job? What even is a good job? Like what's your view on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's a different answer for every person, but for me, I prioritize impact first. So all the jobs that I have ever chosen, it was always about impact. I think sometimes it was about learning, but only when I had nothing else to do otherwise. And now, having done all these different jobs, I know that I also really value autonomy. I really value great culture, personal fit, and a lot of learning opportunities. And I think another thing that's something you'll be able to relate to as a founder, I really like the energy of building something from scratch. And I think that even if it's inside an organization, I really need a role where I can have like a blank sheet of paper to build with. And I guess that's why I'm so excited for my next step to be a new organization as well.
And is it something you found out about yourself over time throughout all these explorations, or is it more something that kind of was clear from the beginning?
Yeah, for sure. In the beginning, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I mean, just for reference, I wanted to be a singer when I was a child. So it was just so far away from impact
Didn't
or
we all? Yeah.
yeah, and then I wanted to be a politician, and I realized that in Belarus, perhaps being a politician isn't very wise. And then I just pivoted into more of a like impact focused career. And I think it took me lots of trialing and failing with these jobs. Like some of them didn't last very long because I realized it wasn't for me. And then I was grateful that I took that, because each role teaches me like, oh, in these particular circumstances, this kind of setup isn't great for me. So for my next role, I'm much clearer about what I want. And I don't think that you can learn that without trying different jobs. I don't think it's possible to know that about yourself without trying that.
And I think I've seen like different approaches of attacking this, right? Like one is you like really try to like write it out. It's like, what are my key uncertainties? Like what do I think I need in job and what not? And how can I figure out if that's really the thing I think? Or it's more of a vibes-based thing, right? You do a job, it's like, I hated this. Like, let me try to find something that's not this and something else. And of course, like it's a spectrum, but like where do you think kind of you fall on that spectrum? And yeah,
I think I'm definitely a trial and error kind of person. I'm very practical, and I think I rely on data a lot. So I think sometimes you could have a situation where perhaps the job is right for you, but the environment is wrong. So every time something is not working out, you need to ask yourself, am I hating this because like I just don't like my manager, for example, or I just don't like the mission of the organization, and otherwise I'll be happy to do it. And you're okay, seems like a good experiment. I'm going to leave this. I'm going to go somewhere else where I think it's like a better environment and try and do this. And if you're wrong again, you're like, okay, well, that was good to know. So that means that I'm just not very good at this. Maybe I should just go and try something else. And I also think what's really important is, because you asked about like what makes a good job, when we list the things that we like, it doesn't mean that when we get all of them, that means that the job is going to be perfect and the dream job, and every day is going to be like so happy and effortless, because all the things that I named come with trade-offs and downsides. I mean, as you know, being a founder is like super uncertain, and the blank sheet of paper is great, but that also means like you have to build it. And I think also knowing like what you can tolerate. For example, I've realized that I can tolerate uncertainty better than perhaps most of the people. So I'm okay doing it. But then maybe there are like some things about being a founder that people will just find really difficult. So I think that it's not only knowing what you really love, but it's also about knowing what like bad things that you can tolerate in exchange for getting all the good things.
And where you kind of fall on the distribution of that skill or that trait, right? Like when you said like you can tolerate that much better than others. I think, yeah, I like chaos much more than others, for example, I think, or can tolerate it, whatever you want to call it. But then structure for me is, well, I'm still a bit German, but tends to come more difficult than for others. Yeah. Yeah. But, and I guess I think the beauty is like everybody's different, right? There's like huge diversity. And when leading a team, that can be a great thing because everybody can bring different perspectives and different skill sets. And if everybody would love chaos, like I don't want to work in that organization, right? That's going to be like complete chaos. But then still, I guess a lot of, at least, yeah, from a lot of managers I've worked with and also from my personal experience, there was always a thing of like if only my employees would be like more agentic or like would just like do things on their own. How was it for you running a team? Like, did you find ways to kind of facilitate or help people become more agentic? Should we even do that? Like maybe there's an upper limit of like, and then it becomes harmful. Yeah. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I love this question. I think that you can hire agentic people or you can hire people who at least have some agency.
Right.
And I think you can cultivate it in your organization. And it's really tricky. I think everyone wants this. And I think when you hire people, one of the ways you can test for it is during test tasks by seeing what kind of questions people are tackling and how do they deal with uncertainty, how quickly they deliver on things, how much work they can achieve in like a limited amount of time. But also during work trials, like I really love designing work trials which rely on the other person to ask you questions and like lead you. And you say, okay, well, you facilitate this meeting or do this and just see what the person does and whether they suggest new initiatives. But I think that once you hired them, then maybe the hard work begins because one of the mistakes I made, and I think I see many managers make, was especially founders, because like we are so agentic and we sometimes almost like bulldoze over the organization with our agency, and all the people working with us could be like, oh wow, so if she's showing so much agency, that means that I don't have to, because maybe the founder is the agentic person, but then I can just sit back and do what the founder says. And I think you need to actively almost like resist this by maybe showcasing, like maybe some of your employees have shown agency in like what I do and what my team now does is like tagging people and saying, hey, well done for doing this. This was like completely unprompted. And in our organization, we actually call it duocracy, which is like another word for agency. And we just do like hashtag duocracy, great job. Like this is such a great example of it. And then I think people who see that, they're like, oh, wow, this behavior is rewarded. So I'm also going to do something like this. And I think sometimes you also need to coach people one-on-one. And I would also say that maybe what's important here is that no one is like 100% agentic. We can be agentic in like different areas of our lives and not agentic in others. So perhaps this person is like very agentic about part of their work, but maybe another part they just blocked by something. And I think it's your job as a manager to like figure out how you can facilitate that, or maybe show them what agency is like in the role. And it's definitely a continuous process, because agency is you're basically like resisting the status quo, and it requires a lot of energy. So you're basically asking all of your team to be like, hey, please expend more energy as you work, rather than just like going with the flow. And I think it's a lot to demand, and you have to like keep it up and keep that culture fresh all the time.
Yeah, I think that it requires expending extra energy, like totally resonates, right? Like it, and maybe to some it comes naturally, but then to keep this sustained over a long time is difficult for sure. I think you mentioned just kind of setting it as a company culture with this like duocracy example, right? I love that. And then maybe also doing something like coaching one-on-one. Like can you give more examples? Like how would you do that coaching? Or like if you would try to coach me now as somebody working with you, like how would you try to help me become more agentic?
So you want a free session, right?
That's why I'm doing this podcast.
Yeah, sure. So I think that I would always talk about what the person's desires and goals are in their career. Because if someone comes to me and says like, hey, Sofia, like I really want to be a movement leader. I really want to excel in my role. I want to like get promoted soon. I'm like, okay, well, what do you think this kind of role looks like. Like what would, like, I don't know, a director of community building, we don't actually have this kind of role, but just an example, like what would a director of community building do? And then we're trying to figure out what is like the gap between what they're doing and what would the director do. And I think I always try and be person-led, because the whole point of agency is that the person has to show for themselves. So I usually go back to their history, because, you know, if we're having this conversation, that means that they probably have some ability to be agentic, and they have shown a few times they were agentic. I'm like, oh, you know what? On these 3 occasions, you showed that you could be agentic. That was really agentic behavior. So what do you think you can do maybe in the next week? You know, give them like a much shorter example to show some agency around your work. And then maybe they'll go and think about this. And then they'll like come up with some kind of a survey unprompted, some kind of project, or look into something that maybe they weren't asked for. And then when they do that, you reward it again. So you say, oh, well done. This was great. #duocracy. What's next? And then you move all the way into a job description of like what they're aiming for, or maybe like the gap between the current one, if they're not like performing on the same level that you would like them to. But I would also say like it is person-led, so you can't force someone to be more agentic, again, because it requires so much agency. And I do think that some of it has to come from like your own design ability. You can coach all you want, but if someone like just isn't interested or doesn't have the energy or the inclination, unfortunately, you can't really bring it out against their will. So I don't think it's always successful.
Did you ever have a case where like, maybe we should talk about cases where like, oh man, this is getting like way too agentic here. Like we need to tone it down.
My God, yes. So at the beginning of Hive, and we actually, it's funny because we share our co-founder, Cam. Your current co-founder was my former co-founder at Hive. And when we first started Hive, we were just so agentic. Like we came up with like 10 ideas a week. We wanted to do so many different things. And what's interesting, we started acting on so many of them. But we both work part-time. Like I had a full-time job, so I had like maybe 10, 15 hours to do this. While I was like tired already, Cam had a full-time job. So we just didn't really have the time to execute on it. And I think that's one of the biggest failure modes of agentic people, is that they don't prioritize well. And they just see something like, okay, I'm just gonna act on it. And it's like, that's great, but like, have you prioritized? Have you compared it to other opportunities? And I think it's just an unfortunate trait of all founders. And I don't think you can completely overcome it. Like my team actually sometimes give me feedback that I come up with an idea, launch a project, but don't think like, oh, how does it compare to everything else we're doing? Like maybe it's impactful, but like we don't have the capacity to do this. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's typical founder thing. So like I need to be a little bit more careful.
I think this very much resonates with me. And the problem of being a solo founder is that I don't have, at least for my other project, that I don't have co-founders or team members who tell me off. So I can just like go in rabbit holes all the time and nobody's going to stop me, except for maybe my customers at some point. Like what's been working for you to force you into this prioritization habit?
I think just realizing that if you don't prioritize, you lose a lot of opportunity cost, because like, yeah, like take your situation. Nobody is telling you off, but like, how do you know what opportunities or like what amazing goals you're not reaching because you're not prioritizing? And, you know, I just started asking myself this question. I was like, right, if I really want Hive to succeed, we have to hyper focus on the most impact producing programs. And I need to make sure that the team can focus on them. Otherwise, they're going to burn out and they're going to leave. And, you know, that's not going to be very good for Hive. And I don't want to burn out either. And I think I think it's still important, especially for like us founder types, to leave some space in your day for like this pure exploration, or like tell yourself, okay, like for maybe a few hours a week, I can just like go on a tangent and then create a new thing. And it doesn't have to, like, I even tell my team, like, oh, it doesn't have to be a Hive thing. Like I could just do it myself. And that's why I created my own Substack, because I was like, oh, I wanted to have my own space where I could just like be creative. And that's why I became an executive coach, because I'm like, oh, I also want to do this side thing. And that's partly why I decided to leave Hive, because I'm like, oh, now it would be great to have a bit more space to just like go and do something completely new.
That totally makes sense. Okay, now you got me curious on the tangent of the executive coach. It's not 100% on the agentic topic, but I'm curious. Yeah, did you take courses? How did you get there? Do you like being an executive coach on the side? What's the experience?
Yeah, I actually thought I would have to take a course, but these courses are so pricey. You can pay like 5, 6 grand and like have to
Right.
put a lot of time in. I was like, yeah, like maybe later in my career. And I always postponed it. I think that actually ties really well with this concept of agency because
Right.
in one of the books that I read by Jay Yang, which I'll leave a link for your listeners. He defines agency as permissionless action. And I was like, well, in order to be an executive coach, I need to have like 20 years of experience and I need to have like gray hair and people need to like look at me and respect me. And then I have an executive coach myself and I was telling him like, oh, maybe one day I'll be like you. And he's like, wait a minute, but like, you're smart and experienced enough to coach other people. Like you've done it for so many years now. Like I have 8 years of management experience and like people respect you. So like, why not just go for it? And I was like, come off it. And then I spoke to my colleague Kevin and he was like, oh, like that'd be such a great idea. Like I'll make you a website. And I was like, okay, because like Kevin is also very agentic. And then I feel like maybe because I was kind of almost looking for permission, looking for some kind of reassurance, or maybe like looking for people to push me, which goes to show that no one is like perfectly agentic. We need other agentic people to like, keep pushing us. I was like, okay, now Kevin made me the website, like I need to publish it. So I just published it and like people just like reached out to me and booked sessions over time. And I was like, wow, like that happens so fast. And like I'm really enjoying it because I get to geek out on one of my favorite things, management and leadership. And I also feel like we have a bit of a gap in our movement with management and leadership skills. And I feel like with small sessions like this, a few times a month, I could really help move that needle for those people because I feel like a few sessions could make a really big difference. I thought, yeah, why not? I have this skill. Really want to help the movement in this way.
Reform. Okay, so like just not doing courses and certificates is already one good agentic hack for your career. Do you have like other ideas for any kind of hacks, career hacks people should do that they don't really do?
Yeah, I think that maybe asking yourself, like, do you really need someone's permission or some kind of certification for it? Just like with my executive coach idea, like you really, like I'm very transparent that, who I am and that I don't have a certificate, but people don't want to have sessions with me because of that. They want because of my experience.
Right.
And I think that maybe really asking yourself, like, whose permission are you looking for? Like, for example, I have a story about writing the Hive Highlights newsletter that was right at the beginning of Hive. And it was like the first program that I decided to do. But I was like, oh my God, like who am I to write a movement newsletter? Like that just seems so big headed. And like, I'm going to go and like write to movement leaders and like seek their permission just to see, like get their blessing and just to make sure they're happy with the content. And like no one replied because it was super busy. And then I remember Carolina Sarah responded and was like, Sofia, I don't have time to look at it, but like just publish it. And I was like, okay, I will that. And then I just started publishing it and like people immediately signed up because like they felt it was high value. I was like, oh wow, you can actually do this. So if you're like asking yourself like, okay, what would you like to do? And like, why do you think that you can't just do it? And like, who's maybe like permission you're looking for, maybe encouragement, like what's actually stopping you here? Because even if you do something and it flops or maybe it's not very good, you can get some feedback on it and like improve later.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a good question to just ask yourself, right? Like where am I maybe waiting for permission or where am I like have this hesitation because I feel like I need approval first or like something like this, right? It's a note for myself also, yeah. Okay, you mentioned this was part of the books that you've been pointing at the beginning. Any other things still fresh on your mind that came out of these books where like people should like just know this? Like what's
Yeah, for sure. So I think one thing is definitely just learning to deal with rejections better. I spoke about this a bit on the How I Learned to Love Shrimp podcast a few years ago, but I'll give you a quick summary. I think that when you're agentic and when you like ask people for things or like ship things, there's going to be a really big chance that a lot of them are not going to pan out. And I think that on our like evolutionary level as humans, we're really afraid of that. And I think you'll constantly need to be overriding this. And I think what I realized is that most people are actually not watching what I do. I think if I do something really well and like my blog post goes up or like one of the projects that I do goes up, everyone knows about it. But if I do something badly, most people like don't even notice it. And I think many people think it's actually the opposite. So realizing that no one is going to like get angry with you if you like ask for perhaps more, then they're willing to do that. Or like just being okay with things failing. And I think one thing to add for myself is maybe something I've done well is I've put myself in a position in my 20s where failing wasn't a big deal. I think I'm not really particularly attached to like status, and my lifestyle was like very affordable. I lived with parents for a very long time and like I house sat for 2 years, and I was like, okay, how can I minimize my expenses so that like I could take the most impactful opportunity, which may not necessarily pay well or maybe be so risky that it could disappear in like a few months because the project fails, but I can tolerate this because I don't have huge expenses and like my lifestyle is like very frugal. And I think that many people don't get that right because they put themselves in positions where they're just so afraid to leave because they just lock themselves into that lifestyle, and like it's changing jobs or trying new projects is like too risky, maybe for the status or maybe because they feel like they can't tolerate it. And you can do like small experiments for sure, and like you can wait for like more secure things. But if you really want to be super authentic and like found things or maybe like just chase impact, I think maybe upping your tolerance of failures is just really important, and like learning to remember that when you fail, you are like, it sounds very cliche, but like you're not a failure and nobody will think you're a failure apart from maybe yourself. But like when you try new things, like it's okay that some things don't work out. And maybe a good way of thinking about it is remembering that expected value is a better concept here rather than like want everything I do to succeed. This is actually from Kate Hall's new book, You Can Just Do Things. And she's like, she said like, okay, it's much better to do things which maybe have like 5% chance of succeeding, but like be super impactful, super successful, rather than picking things which are like 95% chance succeeding because you're just otherwise never going to achieve much impact. But that means you do have to tolerate a lot of failure.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the nice thing about this 5%, 95% is you know very quickly if the 5% worked or didn't work, right? So you can, at least in many cases, I guess. So their failure is also the fast learning thing. I think I know this on a cognitive level, and I've like heard it so often on a cognitive level, but then like on an emotional level, it kind of depends. I think with Euzoia, I really feel like this doesn't have to be perfect. If it's not good, like whatever. It's like a 20% project. It's like, we're just putting this out there. We're going to learn. Like it's going to be fine. But then with my other project with Done That, I feel much more responsible, or I feel much more terrified of like doing something wrong. It's like people are like paying me money for this, and now it might not be working. And like I always feel like terror of like opening feedback emails. It's like, oh God, it's like, is somebody unhappy again? And I, at least for myself, haven't really cracked this, how to, maybe it's also good to have this emotion. I'm not sure, but I still feel this like fear of, or anxiety of failure or something, which is like not productive at all, right? Like if I wouldn't have this, I would be more productive, right? Like the people would be happier probably, but it's somewhere still stuck there. Maybe I just have to practice more and learn again and again and again that it's all fine. But I guess you had this practice in your 20s, right? Just like doing a lot of things, like failing, seeing that it's okay.
Yeah, I think that's totally normal because like as humans, if you're like a normal human, you will never ever feel okay when you're like rejected or when you fail.
Right.
And I think I wrote a post about it on my Substack, how to manage difficult emotions at work. And the whole point of the post was like, it's okay to feel these emotions, but it matters more about what you do after you felt them and then how quickly you can train yourself to recover from them. So yeah, of course, like when I do Hive, I can totally relate. Just like you have done that for Hive, you know, every time we get a funding rejection, it does hurt, especially the first few ones. It did hurt a lot. And I think it took me like a month to recover from the very first one. And to the point that I was like, wow, maybe I shouldn't do this. If like they don't think I should, like maybe I shouldn't. And now I would say I recover within maybe minutes for like some smaller grants, and for larger grants, I would say maybe like a day or like half a day. And like, of course it hurts, but I'm also thinking like, right, that's like the price that you pay for doing something ambitious. And if you never get rejected, if you never have failure, I mean, if you never get that negative feedback, like how are you going to improve, right? And yeah, it does hurt, and that's okay. But then you pay this price and then you recover, get through the feeling. It does suck for a bit. But I always remember like, okay, well, tomorrow it won't suck as much. And I know I always recover from stuff like this. And you know what? Sometimes things take much longer. Like if you get laid off from a job, or like if your project completely fails, it can take you months to feel yourself again. But that's also fine. I think it's just like expecting it and paying it as the price for living a life where you don't limit yourself by the fear of rejection. I think that you can just achieve so much more in the long term.
Yeah, I think this heuristic of like, if you're not being rejected, you didn't aim high enough is a very good one to kind of keep track of. Yeah. All right. I think you mentioned your Substack already twice now, and I didn't read the part about the emotional things. I think I did read the last one on managing people and setting expectations. I found that super helpful actually. So what's the name of the Substack again?
The name of the Substack is Noting the Margin, and I write about all the things that Hive can't publish, but I really want to write about. This is like how it will go. And now it's usually like leadership and management, which I really want to lean into because I'm like, love to geek out about this, but also mental health, because that's quite important to me. And all kinds of like community things, founder life, and this kind of stuff. And actually, one of my most popular posts, which I thought was hilarious, was how I learn languages, because I speak 7 languages to like various degrees of proficiency. And it was like a fun post, which is like leaning more into like surface area for serendipity. And like over 3,000 people ended up liking it, and like loads of people subscribed. So like, it's so funny how like the posts of animal duocracy and community building, like very few people care, but like when they talk about learning languages, like, oh my gosh, it's just like gets so popular.
Well, maybe we'll have to have you back on the podcast for learning languages and doing just some fun things. This has been super fun. We will put all the links into the links and the Substack, to your Substack, to the books, to the posts you mentioned. And yeah, thanks so much for taking the time. This was super fun. And yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much, Christoph.